Prime Minister Mark Carney wants C5 passed by Parliament before the House of Commons rises for the summer. But AFN National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says things are moving too quickly, and First Nations need more time to evaluate how the legislation could affect their rights.
We've always stood forward and helped Canada, but at the same time, when there's bills being rammed through that could affect our rights, and we just got the bill on Friday, a draft, the draft bill. We need time, of course, to legally review it, politically review it as well, and we're not being given that time.
AFN Regional Chief for British Columbia, Terry Teegee, was also at the Ottawa presser on Wednesday. He says free, prior, and informed consent does not necessarily mean individual First Nations have veto power over specific development projects.
No government has a veto, meaning that when we come to a decision, all governments come into a room to make a decision together. And I think, First Nations certainly, as a part of this, need to be part of the decision-making process.
Teegee says if all parties take the time to build consensus, it can be achieved. But at the same time, he says Canadian governments have historically used the term national interest as a way to bypass Indigenous rights altogether.
We're in the middle of a tariff war, and there's these external pressures upon Canada, British Columbia, and what have you, where there's a big push for many of these projects. However, far too often we've seen this in British Columbia, we've seen it in Canada as well, is that it's at the expense of our rights, title, and interest.
Woodhouse adds the appropriate time for governments to consult with First Nations is while legislation is being drafted, not after it has passed into law.
They want to push through this legislation right to the end of this month, and I think that's the wrong way to go. And even though they have committed to meet with First Nations leadership, they've committed to that for this summer. The Prime Minister himself will meet with chiefs. I think you need to do that before you pass any legislation so that they can have input.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.